A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. My dear brothers, Khuddam and Atfal, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. I know it's been a long couple of days and today's been very wet and muddy and probably people are very tired. But the fact that we have such high attendance here is testimony to the determination of the Khuddam here and the Atfal, of course. Just yesterday I was reading a recent article by Sadr Sahib, Majlis Khuddamul Ahmadiyya, which was printed in Al-Hakam. And in the article he mentioned how in Pakistan they are unable to hold their ijtemas for many, many years because of the persecution that everybody knows of. And there are many people here as well who have come from Pakistan or whose parents came from Pakistan who will feel that loss themselves. But alongside that, they will feel such a great blessing that here in the UK and in other Western countries, we are able to offer our ijtemas each and every year with freedom. And each year we see they're getting bigger and bigger. And despite the bad weather, the same is true this year as well. That alhamdulillah, there are so many new exhibitions, so many new presentations and different activities for all of the Khuddam. But anyway, I'm going to share a few incidents about Hazur, who I've had the great fortune and privilege of traveling with for the last few years. And the topic I think they put of this speech was about documenting the travels of Hazur. So before telling you a few incidents about Hazur, I would like to tell you a little bit about the diary that I write and how I started to write that diary. I've been traveling with Hazur since 2008. That was the first time I ever had the chance to travel abroad with Hazur when he went to Africa. And for 3 or 4 years, I used to travel on some trips with Hazur, some trips I wouldn't. And during the course of each tour, I would do official work for my office, which would mean we would have press releases, we would take notes of Hazur's events, and that would all happen throughout the tour. But in 2012, Hazur went to America, and I had a feeling that it was going to be a very historic tour. We knew that Hazur was going to go to Capitol Hill, which is their equivalent of Parliament, and deliver an address there. We knew that Hazur had many, many meetings with very senior people and was going to be traveling a lot. And so I thought, apart from my official reports that I write, I'm going to write something that I'm going to call a diary. And in this I'm going to mention some personal incidents or personal feelings or even some humorous activities that I might have seen on the tour. But my intention at the time was not to share it publicly at all. Actually, it was more my idea that I will keep the diary as a personal memento, something that perhaps I can look back on in 15 or 20 years or however long, or perhaps something that I can show to my children. I didn't even have children back then, but it was still something in my mind that perhaps one day I would be able to show my children so that they would know that I had the opportunity to go on this historic tour with Hazur. And so from that perspective, I kept some notes about different things, different activities. And when I got back, I typed them up. It took me a few days to do so. And having done so, I just put them in a file in my office or in my house, I can't remember exactly, and didn't think anything more of them for a few days at least. After a few days, I thought that Hazur was so kind enough to take me with him on that trip, so perhaps I should at least share this diary with him. Perhaps Hazur might have a few moments to flick through those 50 or 60 pages, just a few lines here and there. And so I sent it in to Hazur to read. And a few days later, I didn't know Hazur had read it or how much he had read. But I was having mulaqat, and Hazur mentioned to me, he said, that diary that you sent in, I've read it, and you should send it to your friends. And Hazur didn't mention which friends or how many people. He just mentioned, send it to a few of your friends. And so I did that. I sent it to 15, 20 people, perhaps some of my family members, and perhaps they sent it to a few others, and it circulated a little bit in that way. Having done that, I thought nothing else of it, and I thought this was just a one-off. A few months later, 8 or 9 months later, Hazur returned to America for another tour in 2013. And this time, he went to the west coast of America, and then he went to Canada as well. At the end of the tour, I hadn't really kept any proper notes. I'd made a few notes here and there, but even those I had misplaced. And so I just did my normal office duties on that trip. When I came back, when Hazur came back from America, he asked me after a few days that, have you started writing your diary? And at that moment I really panicked, because I knew that I hadn't really made any effort to keep notes on this trip. And even the few notes that I had made, I had lost. And anyway, I somehow mentioned that to Hazur with a lot of fear in my heart, that Hazur, this time I didn't keep proper notes. Anyway, hearing that, Hazur said a phrase in Urdu. I can't remember the exact phrase, but the phrase was something that made it clear to me that Hazur was displeased by the fact that I had failed to keep any notes for my diary on this occasion. And he even said to me, he said that even if you haven't made any notes, you should try to use your memory and write something up now. But unfortunately, my memory is very weak in most things, and I didn't want to write something about Hazur where I was unsure about the facts. So anyway, then after that, a few more months passed. And then in 2013, Hazur had a very blessed and historic tour, which was a tour of Australia, New Zealand, and Japan and Singapore. Hazur was gone for 53 days. And Alhamdulillah, I was able to stay close to Hazur during those 53 days and to learn from him, to see how he conducted very many meetings, to see how Hazur would work from morning till evening, meeting people from different parts of the world, and also seeing how people from the Far East, from Australia, from Indonesia, from all these countries that gathered to see their love for Khilafat. It was even now one of the highlights of my life was that 2013 tour of Hazur to Australia and the Far East. And though I enjoyed the tour, as the days started winding down towards the end of the tour, it started occurring to me that now I'm going to have to write about this when we get back to London. And I truly did not know where to start or how to start. How would it be possible to put into words some of the blessings that I had seen, some of the amazing incidents witnessed. For example, in New Zealand, Hazur was welcomed by the Maoris in a traditional way, something that in my mind I will never ever forget. But I was wondering, how will I be able to describe such scenes in words that people are interested, or that at least that I can satisfy whatever Hazur desires from me. So ultimately, after the long trip, Hazur returned to London, and I knew what was coming, but I didn't start writing myself. I kept wondering, but then after a few days, 3 or 4 days perhaps, Hazur said to me, he said, "Have you started writing your diary? I hope you kept some notes this time." And so then I mentioned to Hazur that yes, I have kept some notes, but it seems very, very difficult to write about such a mammoth tour, such a huge tour. I don't even know where to start. So then Hazur very graciously, he said, just start with the first day, and don't try and think that you have to write this diary in one long part like a book. Rather, you should start publishing it in different parts, 60 or 70 pages, and then move on to the next one. And so that's what I started to do. And that trend continues until today as well, with the grace of Allah. So after 60 or 70 pages were ready, I submitted the diary to Hazur. Of course, the vast majority, if not all, is about him or relates to him in some way. And so I do not want to ever write anything that could be contrary to the wishes of Hazur himself. However, Hazur is so busy, he has hundreds and hundreds of official letters to go through every day, 1,000 or more personal letters to go through every day. He has so many meetings with Jamaat officials, family mulaqats. So I kept wondering that if I give this diary to Hazur, I don't know how much he'll be able to check it. Perhaps he'll again just might scroll through a few pages, and it might take Hazur a few weeks to return the document to me. Thus, when I handed in the first part, the next day I reported for mulaqat, and I was completely astonished that Hazur returned to me those 70 pages. And he said that last night, after I had completed all of my work, it was around 11:30 or 11:40 at night, and then I started to read your diary, and I thought that you will want to publish it, and so I kept reading it, even though it went past my bedtime, my normal bedtime. Perhaps Hazur sleeps around midnight, and Hazur said that until about 12:40 or 12:50, I continued to read it. I was genuinely amazed. And then I was even more amazed when I saw that Hazur said that the diary is okay, but there's about 6 spelling mistakes that I found. And so you need to correct them, otherwise people will think that you don't know how to spell. And so then Hazur very graciously showed me some of the mistakes that I had made. One of the words actually was 5 of the words I read, and I knew that they were typing errors. But the 6th word, or 5th or 6th word, I thought that I had actually spelt it correctly. And so I was a little bit confused that Hazur has marked this as a typing error. And perhaps Hazur saw that look of surprise on my face, or look of doubt even you should never doubt Hazur. That's probably the biggest lesson I've learned over the past 10 years. But anyway, Hazur said, that is spelled incorrectly, that word. The word was prophesied, but Hazur said I had put an extra S in it. But I said to Hazur, I think the extra S is part of the spelling. Hazur then took out a dictionary, and he said, check the word. And so I did check the word the way I would like to spell it. And it came up as though saying, this is not a word. Then Hazur said, now put in the way I have said to spell it. And so I did that, and you'll not be surprised to know the word came up perfectly normal with the correct definition. And so anyway, the point of that incident anyway, it was a learning experience for me, and an amazing experience, that my Khalifa, despite all his huge responsibilities and burdens, he still took the time to write this diary, to read the diary carefully. And now, in the past, Hazur had told me, he said, send it to your friends. And so this time I asked, Hazur, who should I send it to? And he said, send it to your friends like you did last time, but also you can send it to Al-Islam. They might want to print it. It's up to them. So with that, again, I built up a small contact list of my friends, my colleagues, and I sent it to them. And I also sent it to Al-Islam. And what I found interesting is that Hazur could easily have said, tell Al-Islam that they must publish it. Hazur's Khalifatul Masih, he's the master of everything. But where there's, Hazur always, unless it's absolutely necessary for him to make a direct decision, he likes following the Nizam, and he likes showing us and teaching us that we should follow the Nizam. And so Hazur said, submit it to them and see if they're happy to publish it. And after, I think they did take their time in reviewing it and checking it, but then they started to publish it. Anyway, I had finished the first part, but still, there was still another 45 days of that single tour to go. And again, I started to write, but some days I would feel very tired of writing, or I would get busy in my home life, or I would get busy with my office work or routine. And so perhaps 1 or 2 days would pass and I would write a bit less. And I always knew the question was coming from Hazur. And then surely after 1 or 2 days, Hazur would say, how many lines have you written? How many words have you written since you gave me the last update? And then I would be forced to admit that I hadn't made much progress. Then Hazur would say, okay, then you need to send me the next draft within the next 2 or 3 days. And then of course, when you get an instruction from Hazur, then you have to act upon it, and of course, that's what we desire to do always. And so that would motivate me to then work for the next 2 or 3 days or 4 days, however long Hazur had given me, to make sure that I would have that next draft ready to present to him. In that way, those 6 or 7 weeks of that tour, but actually more than 7 weeks, I was able to complete the diary. But I don't think it's any exaggeration to say that the diary was only completed because of the motivation, the prayers, the guidance of Hazrat Khalifatul Masih. In fact, on one occasion, I can't remember exactly if it was after that tour or perhaps it was one of Hazur's future tours. Hazur mentioned to me in passing, he said, people don't know, but I'm actually the editor of your diary. And that was a great honor for me. And of course, to even think that Hazur would read something that you write is a great privilege and an honor. Also, whilst writing these diaries, I've seen how amazing Hazur's memory is. That's something else that constantly leaves a person shocked and surprised. Hazur might have a tour for 4 or 5 weeks or 3 or 4 weeks in which he's had hundreds of meetings, literally hundreds of meetings with MDs, with non-MDs. And I would write a detail about one of those meetings, perhaps one of the less important meetings. And I would quote something that Hazur had said, or I would quote something that a guest had said. And somehow, whilst going through those things, Hazur would say that no, it wasn't exactly like this. My exact words were this. And it might just be 1 or 2 words different, but somehow Hazur remembered exactly what he had said or what the other person had said or how an incident was. I've mentioned a little bit about the diary and how it is written. I'm just going to share a few incidents now, and then if there's any questions, then I'll be happy to answer them. As all of you know, the theme of this year's Ijtema is Salat, Namaz. And that is, like in everything else in this era, our example should always be Hazrat Khalifatul Masih. I've seen for so many years, and it's not just me, everybody who's had any contact with Hazur or seen how Hazur works in any way will testify to the fact that in every way Hazur's trust in Allah is incredible. I remember once I was sitting in Hazur's office. I can't remember how the conversation started, but I remember one point very, very clearly. Hazur said to me, he said that there's no decision that I take lightly. When it comes to the Jamaat, or if people ask me for my guidance in any respect, whether it's their personal lives or for some Jamaat issue, Hazur said there's not a single issue that I take lightly. Hazur said that sometimes I take my time in making a decision sometimes. And the reason I take my time is so that I can focus on prayer. There's no decision I make without dua and without doing istighfar. And then Hazur said that once I make that decision, because I have done that dua, because I have sought Allah Ta'ala's help, then I remain firm on that decision no matter what. It was incredibly powerful and moving to hear those words. Every day Hazur makes dozens, if not some days hundreds of decisions or gives advice. And yet not a single piece of advice Hazur gives without contemplating, without seeking the help of Allah Ta'ala. And you also get to see the wisdom of Hazur's decisions time and time again. And when you see the wisdom and the results that emanate from Hazur's decisions, then it reinforces that this is surely a person who has been guided by Allah, whose supplications are heard by Allah Ta'ala. I remember Hazur went to Canada in 2016 for quite a long tour for 5 or 6 weeks. And before the tour, the Canadian Jamaat had arranged for Hazur to visit Quebec, which is the French-speaking part of Canada. And the reason they had arranged this was that on Hazur's previous visit to Canada, he had said, I would like to visit Quebec whenever I next come to Canada. So based on that instruction, they made preparations for this. There's no real Jamaat in Quebec. Certainly at that time, there was only 1 or 2 families. Most of the MDs in Canada are either in Western Canada or in Toronto area. In Quebec, we had hardly any families. And so it was very difficult for the Jamaat to arrange something in that French-speaking part of Canada. So for many months, the Jamaat would send people, the representatives to Quebec to make contacts with local politicians, with dignitaries, so that whenever Hazur came, it would be, they could arrange something suitable for Hazur's arrival. After many weeks and months of effort, the Canadian Jamaat were able to make a good contact with a member of the state parliament. in Quebec. And they arranged for Hazur to be invited to the State Parliament and to deliver an address. And the Canadian members were very excited by this. After, alhamdulillah, with the grace of Allah, all of their efforts of many weeks had reached a good conclusion, and now they could report to Hazur that we are ready to invite you to Quebec. So the planned itinerary for that 6-week tour was sent to London in advance. And Hazur went through it and checked the different dates and where they planned for Hazur to attend. And Hazur actually approved all of the trip, as far as I recall. But the only part he did not approve was the Quebec part, and he put a big cross through it. And Hazur said, I'm not going to travel to Quebec. When this information was relayed to the Canadian Jamaat, of course they accepted it and they followed it, but they were surprised. One of the National Amla members who was heavily involved, he phoned me up and he was very, very perplexed. And he said that Hazur told us to arrange something in Quebec. We have arranged it and we worked really, really hard. But now Hazur has said he's not going to come. And this could be such a good program. And I think he was perhaps trying to get me to go back to Hazur and mention that this is a really promising trip and see if Hazur would reconsider. But I told him, I said that if Hazur's put a cross through it, there will be some benefit and you should just focus on the rest of the trip. A few weeks had passed by. Hazur had now arrived in Canada and the tour was going on. And we'd actually passed those days when Hazur was scheduled to go to Quebec. And anyway, one day that same Secretary, National Amla member, who had tried to perhaps persuade me to go back to Hazur, he came up to me one day and I saw he was very, very emotional. He was actually shivering. And so I asked him, what's the matter? He said, 2 days ago was the period when Hazur was meant to go and address that reception in Quebec. And yesterday, last night, that Member of Parliament who we made contact with was arrested and forced to resign because the police had found out he'd been involved in some very, very immoral activities. The Secretary said to me, he said that if that plan had gone ahead, then 2 days ago it would have been all over the Canadian media that Hazur was being welcomed by this gentleman and Hazur was walking along with this gentleman. And the very next day it would have been exposed to the whole world that that same gentleman or that same person had been involved in all of these immoral activities. He said if that trip had gone ahead, the whole tour would have been ruined and all of the good publicity and all of the good spread of Islam through the media on this trip would have been compromised. So this was a great lesson to him, to me, and to all of us, that we should never ever even hesitate for a second when we hear an instruction of Hazrat Khalifatul Masih. No question should come in our mind that why? When in school, in the Western world, I know I grew up in this system as well. We are encouraged quite a lot to ask questions, to ask why, what is the logic, what is the reason? What is the theory? And in most things, generally speaking, certainly that is something to be applauded. But it is my firm resolution, based on my experiences over the past 11 or 12 years, that the one exception is Khilafat Ahmadiyya. When it comes to Khilafat Ahmadiyya, there is no why. There is only we listen, we hear, and we obey. That is the spirit that all of us should always inculcate and strive towards. Again, as mentioned, the theme of the Ijtema is dua. And I got a very beautiful lesson, or I was able to observe a very beautiful lesson, I should say, of the importance of dua when Hazur visited Japan last in 2015. Sometimes in all Jamaats, it's a cause of regret that sometimes there will be some politics or between MDs or between office bearers. You often see it sometimes even in the smaller Jamaats. And sometimes people, MDs, even though we should all be like brothers, they have problems with each other, or they may have arguments or quarrels or family disputes. And this was something that I think that I felt a little bit or observed when I was in Japan, that there was some tensions between some people. Anyway, when there was an Amla meeting with Hazur, National Amla meeting, and one of the Amla members, he actually said to Hazur that, Hazur, I'm ashamed to say it, but we have quarrels amongst ourselves. We are not united. Sometimes I think some of the people in the Amla are against me. I'm sure some of them think that I'm against them. We have tried for a long time to try and settle whatever these frictions that exist, but we have not been able to do it. At that point, the person who was presenting this matter to Hazur broke down in tears. He said, Hazur, I feel ashamed, and I seek your guidance about how do we solve this. Hazur said, if you have a problem with somebody, if you have a quarrel with somebody, if you think that some injustice has been done to you, I do not want you to fight back. I do not want you to argue with them. All I want is humility. Your job is to bow down before Allah Ta'ala and weep with true humility. If you are honest, if you are in the right, then I swear by Allah that Allah will speak on your behalf, and He will defend your honor, and He will guide the other people and show the truth. As Hazur said these words, whereas before just that single person was crying, suddenly all of the Amla members began weeping with tears, probably realizing and feeling that same shame that other person felt, and also realizing that whilst they were trying to perhaps get one over each other or trying to prove that they were in the right, all of them had now been given this beautiful lesson from Khalifatul Masih about how to deal with such issues. And so, truly there's no issue that cannot be solved with prayer. Again, this is something that I've come to see through Khilafat, through the life of Hazrat Khalifatul Masih. If you just look at his life, it's incredible. It's beyond words. From morning till evening, Hazur is engaged in his office work. From morning till evening, he is guiding the Jamaat. Hazur just came back from an 18-day tour 3 days ago. I'm witness, and so are many other people, that during that tour, Hazur did not take a minute's rest. Whether whilst he was in Germany, whilst he was in Belgium, from morning till evening, he was working, he was serving, he was meeting MDs. Sometimes the mulaqat lists would be completed. Hazur would meet 50 or 60 families in one go. And suddenly, somebody would come and say, we didn't get a chance to meet Hazur. We are desperate. Please at least just convey our request to Hazur. If Hazur then declines, we will at least have that reassurance that Hazur knew that we wanted to see him. On those occasions, the Private Secretary Sahib would mention to Hazur that the time is finished, but there are still people who have come to see you. Not once did Hazur say that, no, I will not see them, the time is finished. Every single time, Hazur would say, bring them in. Hazur would give them time, show great love to their children. I remember the program this is just a few days ago, in Belgium, the final full day of the tour was Monday, and Hazur was working till Monday evening, very late in the night. The next day we were scheduled to leave Belgium at 3 o'clock. In the program, there was nothing for the morning. And I asked 4 or 5 people that, is there any program in the morning? Because of course then we need to get ready. They all said, no, there's no program in the morning. Tuesday morning has been kept free. In my heart, based on the past experiences that I've had, I was not convinced, even though everybody was telling me that this period is going to be free and that perhaps Hazur can have a few hours before the travel for rest. Last thing, on Monday night, 4 or 5 nights ago, we suddenly got a message. People were frantically moving around, saying Hazur's instructed that tomorrow morning there will be a full session of mulaqats, and after that he will meet the local Amla members in Musafa, and there were some other jobs to do. And at that moment, I was not in the least surprised. I'd been expecting that message all day, because I knew that Khalifatul Masih is that one person who is entirely selfless, and that so it transpired. The next morning, Hazur came to the office, and until literally a few moments before he was due to depart for London, Hazur continued meeting MDs and engaging in Jamaat activities. Hazur arrived back here late in the evening. Then Wednesday and Thursday, Hazur will have been so busy, I know he was so busy, preparing for the Friday sermon which was coming straight up, and also Hazur, this Ijtema was coming up, and of course Hazur would have to prepare for that as well. Hazur gave his khutbah yesterday, and then straight from there he travelled here. He is here amongst us. 5 times a day he is leading the prayers to all of you. This is Khilafat. In Germany, somebody asked Hazur, that it was a guest, that you are so busy in these days of Jalsa Salana. We have seen you that you don't take any rest, but this is the Jalsa, so you must be busy. What is your normal routine like? With a smile on his face, Hazur said, this is my daily routine every single day. I don't have a weekend. I don't take holidays. This is my life. Another person asked Hazur that how do you accomplish everything that you do? How is it humanly possible? These are non-Muslim people, but who have just observed Hazur's routine. And Hazur said, Hazur is the height of humility at all times. He said that it's no quality of mine The only reason my work gets done is because I have Allah's help with me at every single step. I mentioned Hazur's humility. Somebody asked Hazur in Germany just a few days ago that, how did you get elected as Khalifa? Why you? That person, perhaps he thought that Hazur, it may have been like a political election where people canvass, or perhaps he thought that Hazur might mention some of his own qualities, that these are the reasons that perhaps I was chosen by God Almighty for this post. But in response to that question, that why you, Hazur just smiled and said, you know, this is one dilemma that I still have not been able to find the answer for. All of us, I am sure, certainly I can say from my own hand on heart, I know the answer, having seen him over the past 10, 11, 12 years. You see his qualities every single moment, every single day, at all times. So the more you see him, the more you understand why Allah the Almighty has chosen him as Khalifa. I'm sure there may be some questions, so I'm not going to speak for much longer. I'm just going to mention briefly one meeting that Hazur had a few months ago in London. And it was with a professor from America. It was a female professor had traveled from America, especially to meet Hazur. And one thing, she asked a number of questions during that meeting. And one thing she asked Hazur was about his relationship with the fourth Khalifa, Hazrat Khalifatul Masih. She said, how were you influenced by him? What was your relationship with him like? Hazur's answer was very interesting. Hazur said that Hazrat Khalifatul Masih was my uncle. Hazur said this. And we lived very close together in Pakistan, in Rabwa. And because of this, we had a very frank and loving relationship. And for that reason, even though Khalifatul Masih was older, I was able to joke with him, smile with him, speak freely like one might with a friend or a close relative. But Hazur said that the day he was elected Khalifa, Hazrat Khalifatul Masih IV, it was like instantly there was a barrier placed between us. From my side, Hazur said from my side. He said that frankness was instantly finished and was transformed into pure and utter respect. And Hazur said that from the moment Khalifatul Masih was elected Khalifa, I had only one desire in my heart, in my mind. And that was that I wanted to be the most obedient and most respectful follower of him out of the entire Jamaat. And we know how Allah Ta'ala fulfilled that desire of Hazrat Khalifatul Masih, that surely he was the most obedient, most respectful follower of Khalifatul Masih. And this was the reason that Allah Ta'ala brought him forward for this post as Khalifatul Masih Khamis. In that same meeting, the lady asked Hazur about his own position, and she asked him about the fact that as Khalifa, he had millions of followers. Upon this, Hazur remarked, I have never, ever desired any authority. I have never, ever desired any power over any person. I am here only because Allah Ta'ala has put me in this position. And I will continue to serve to the very best of my abilities until I breathe my last breath. Hazur said, I am weak, I am humble, I am nothing. Those were Hazur's exact words. I was the only other person in the room that day. And as Hazur said these words of pure humility, I could not control back my tears. And I just thought that how fortunate are we Ahmadis that we have, or in the rest of the world, everybody, there are people who are craving power, who are desperate for leadership, who want people to know them, who want people to come and follow them. But our Khalifa is the complete opposite. He desires no power, no authority. He considers himself nothing. But the bond between us, Ahmadis and Khilafat, if there's one thing I've learned, it is completely unbreakable. All the forces of the world could gather together. They could never ever part Ahmadis from their Khalifa and their Khalifa from Ahmadis. We are extremely, extremely fortunate people. I remember, and this has happened on countless occasions, but one lady comes to mind who I met. She was from America. She came to the UK Jalsa, and she was just observing the atmosphere of the Fazl Mosque, seeing that people were coming and going for prayers behind Hazur, knowing that Hazur was just a few feet away in his office. And so I asked her, I said, how is your experience going? I did not expect it at all, but the lady completely broke down in tears. She said, you do not realize how lucky you are. You do not realize how blessed you are. All of you people in the UK can come and pray behind Hazur anytime you like. You can come to the mosque and know that you are just a few feet away from Hazur, whereas the rest of us, we are living deprived lives thousands of miles away. She said, I live in a very affluent area in America, but all the riches of the world mean nothing in comparison to what all of you have. So anyway, I know it's late, so I'm not going to speak anymore. But if anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to answer. Jazakallah. I'll just grab my notes.
Assalamu alaikum, Jazakallah for those inspiring words. I've got a number of questions. If I ask a few of them, I'll get in trouble. And a few others have been already covered by you. So I'd ask this first question, which is, I think it's, of all the trips, Huzur's trips, which trip do you think Huzur has enjoyed the most?
That's a tough question, actually. I mean, I think Hazur's been asked that question himself in the past. And Hazur said many, many times, or Hazur has said rather, that all the trips are equal in the sense that he just wants to go and see the members of the Jamaat. Hazur has no interest, or very, very rarely interest, in seeing a country physically, or to see the leaders of those countries. Hazur only has one desire, and that is to see the Ahmadiyya Muslims. I remember Hazur went to Capitol Hill in 2012 and that was a very historic trip. In Canada, Hazur went to the Parliament and spent the whole day in Parliament and met the Prime Minister, had many, many meetings. And later on, Hazur remarked that where we were all so excited by these historic events and how wonderful they had been, Hazur said that today I've been missing the atmosphere at the masjid and I've been away from my MDs. And so I think in that sense, Hazur's favorite tours will be, of course, wherever MDs are sincere, where MDs are following the example of Khilafat, where MDs are heeding the advice and the words of the promised Messiah alayhi salam. So in that sense, if you would ask me what my favorite tour is, perhaps I could have given an answer, but for Hazur, he loves all MDs the same.
Jazakallah. So next question is also about the trips. Does Hazur take a keen interest in the customs and the language spoken in the countries? And does he pick up any of these languages? And it's also about his diet, whether he stick to a strict diet, langar diet, or does he get to try any local dishes as well?
Yes, as long as somebody's culture or somebody's traditions or food for that matter are not opposed to the teachings of Islam, Hazur enjoys learning about different cultures, learning about their customs, and certainly wherever he goes, if he has the opportunity, Hazur will sample some of the local food. And the most vivid recollection of the food that I have is from Japan, where you can imagine the food was very, very different to the traditional langar food. There was all sorts of strange dishes put before us. Certainly in one meal I remember, there was octopus, there was tortoise, there was strange looking sushis, much different to the type of sushis that you would see in the supermarkets here. And before trying every single dish, I would look towards where Hazur was seated, and I would see that Hazur was eating them without any problem. And it was then when I saw that Hazur was eating them that then I would think that I should at least have a little bit of courage myself, and I would sample them. Some of them tasted better than others. Some of them tasted less better than others. But the thing is, the point is that being willing to sample the local customs is certainly something Hazur does. In terms of language, I think obviously wherever you go, you pick up a few words here and there. And in terms of customs, again, Japan, their custom that wherever you would, whenever you meet anybody, it is their custom to bow down. And so people would bow down to Hazur, and then in response, Hazur would greet them in the same way by bowing down to them. And often they would then bow down again, and then Hazur would bow down again. And then in my mind, as I was observing it, I was wondering who's going to stop bowing first, and I hope it doesn't waste many minutes of Hazur's time. And sometimes it would go on for a long while, but Hazur would always wait until the other person had done the final bow, and or until Hazur had done the final bow and the other person would then withdraw. So extremely respectful of people's cultures and traditions, and that is something that I've certainly learned from Hazur, and it's something that we should all pay attention to, because sometimes we can be a little bit ignorant of these things, and we can just mix with our own or ignore the fact that everybody has their own different ways.
Jazakallah. So, the next one is quite a personal question. Someone wants to know, what is it like being in the presence of Hazur for I think 53 days continuously? I think they are referred to a particular tour. And someone also asked, do you still get nervous around Hazur?
I can say without any exaggeration that with every mulaqat I have with Hazur, or every time I meet him, the nerves increase. They've never ever lessened. Those moments before I enter Hazur's office, as I might be sitting in the private secretary's office, the heartbeats getting faster and faster. I try my best to hide it, but it's always there. And the reason it gets worse and more is because with every day that passes, you get to understand the true status of Khilafat more and more. Every day, Hazur will say something, or Hazur will do something that shows you and proves to you his connection with Allah the Almighty. And when you see that connection with Allah, it increases the fears, because as an individual, you know your own weaknesses. And so every time I go in there, I'm wondering that I know that Hazur knows my weaknesses, he knows my flaws, and so that fear always increases. There's no doubt about it. And was there another part?
Yeah, what was it like being in the presence of Hazur for so many days in a particular trip? I can't quite read what it was.
The thing is that trip was very, very blessed, and we traveled to different countries, and alongside the office mulaqats or the office work, I was very fortunate on that trip to have some personal moments with Hazur. And those are treasures for me for the rest of my life. I remember that, for one example, I was able to do Eid with Hazur in Australia. And that in itself was a great blessing, that to be on the other side of the world and yet to still be able to offer my Eid prayer behind Hazur was incredible. And then I remember that day, out of his grace, knowing that I was far away from my family, Hazur said that you should have your Eid lunch with me. And so I was able to go into Hazur's home after the Eid prayers, and for the first half an hour or so, Hazur was looking at some videos that he had taken of some earlier parts of the tour on his personal video camera. And one of the things that he had put on the video camera was that Hazur visited a bird park in Australia, and Hazur was feeding the birds. And at that point, when Hazur was feeding the birds, he had handed the video camera over to me. And he said, "You take the video." And I didn't know how to use Hazur's video camera. It wasn't like a phone, it was one of those older style ones. And my hand was shaking, knowing that Hazur has asked me to take this video, and it's this precious moment of Hazur. Anyway, Munir Sahib thankfully was there from MTA, and so I quickly found him and I said, "Can you tell me how to use this video camera?" And he quickly told me. He said, this is how to switch it on, this is how to hold it. And still I was shaking it, but after a few seconds I was able to control it somewhat. So anyway, going back to Eid Day, Hazur was going through his videos whilst I was sat next to him in his home. And suddenly I realized that Hazur had got to the part of that bird park, and my heart really genuinely sunk. I thought Hazur's going to see, and the substandard quality of my filming. And just as I was thinking that, Hazur said ke acha ab tumhara imtihan aane wala hai, that your test is about to be taken. And again, I was completely petrified. And I knew that the first 10 or 15 seconds was terrible footage. and that I was facing the ground, and I was just praying that Hazur would wait long enough to get to the part where it starts getting a bit better. And so 5 seconds passed, and it was just basically the people's feet, no sign of Hazur. 10 seconds passed, and it was the same footage. And at that point, Hazur looked up at me, and I just looked at the ground. And then I was just praying, and then I think I said to Hazur, I said that just to make sure that Hazur stayed, I said, Hazur, I think it's going to get a little better. And then 5 or 10 seconds passed, and then I breathed a sigh of relief, because suddenly the camera did become still, and there was a very nice shot of Hazur feeding this bird very, very beautifully, and the bird enjoying that moment as well, it seemed. And so then Hazur watched that for 20, 30 seconds, and then he said, Chalo tum paas ho gaye ho. And so that was a relief, to say the least. And so then after that, it was time for the prayers. So we went and did Zohr and Asr, and I thought that was it, actually. But then Hazur said, we haven't had lunch yet. I've told you you're going to have lunch with me today. And so I went back into Hazur's home, and it was a real privilege. And there was a few other people there, of course, Hazrat Begum Sahiba, but also 2 or 3 other members of Hazur's family who were based in Australia. And I didn't know exactly where to sit. There was 5 or 6 seats, and so I just stood in the corner thinking I will go and sit on the side somewhere. But Hazur told me to come and sit next to him. And then I, obviously at Hazur's table, you were very reluctant to take too much food. You don't want Hazur to think you eat like an idiot, or like so much food, and plus also you're so nervous you don't want to eat too much. And Hazur could see that, could see the nerves, and so Hazur said, "Chalo, main tumhara plate banata hu, I'll make your plate." And so Hazur took it, and it was a huge plate of, I can't remember, but much more than I would normally ever be able to eat. 4, 5, 6 kebab, lots of tikke, and I remember thinking that I don't know how I will eat this. And the interesting thing for me was that everybody had finished their meal. Hazur had finished his meal, Hazrat Begum Sahiba had finished her meal, everybody else had finished their meal, and I still had about 4 kebabs on my plate. and plenty of tikke as well. And I was eating as fast as I could by that, because I realized that Hazur was not getting up until I had finished. And I thought that obviously I don't want to waste Hazur's time. But Hazur was in a relaxed mood. He said, "Khao aram se khao." But it was his grace and kindness that perhaps it took me another 15, 20 minutes, and he stayed until the end. So that too, from a personal perspective, there are a few memories as well that mean that I'll never forget it. So Jazakallah.
Jazakallah, Abid Sahib. The next one is also a personal question. Someone wants to know, does Hazur talk in Urdu with you mostly? If so, are you able to write what he says in Urdu?
Yes, I would say 99.9% of the time, Hazur speaks to me in Urdu, and I respond in very, very weak Urdu, and I try not to respond in English unless I absolutely have to. I know I make a lot of mistakes when I respond, but I try to respond in the same language that I know that Hazur is most comfortable in, and I know that Hazur wants me to improve my Urdu, and that's the reason I respond. But obviously when I'm making notes, I either write it quickly in Roman Urdu if I want to make sure that I recall Hazur's exact words, but otherwise I will simultaneously translate it into English and write it in that way. And so that's my method.
Jazakallah, sir. The next question, I think you mentioned already in your speech, but this is a question from a Tifl, so if you allow me, I'll read it out. The Tifl wants to know, and I think it was mentioned by Ibrahim Saab and Munir Saab in the talk as well, but the Tifl still wants to know, how does Hazur cope with all this workload? Jazakallah.
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's very, very true that Hazur's workload is incredible. I mentioned it before, but you just should think about the fact that Hazur has no break. People, the rest of us, if we do have periods in our lives where we're very, very busy. We might have 2 or 3 days, or if you're preparing for the Ijtema, you might have a week where you're very, very busy. But you always have that thought in your mind that after a few days or after a week or so, I can have a sleep in, or I can relax for a day or two. And just working towards that is, and then when you have that period where you have a few extra hours or a day or two to yourself, you're able to recharge your batteries and you feel better, and then you're ready to go again. But Hazur never has that. And the thing is that none of us have ever stopped Hazur from having a break. All of us would be very, very delighted, I'm sure, if Hazur did take some time for himself. And I know that personally, on a number of occasions, I've asked Hazur that why doesn't Hazur take a few days to rest, or even a few hours to rest? And on each occasion, Hazur just smiles. He doesn't even need to respond. He knows the answer. I know the answer. We all know the answer. That because Allah Ta'ala has given him this duty, and because he has such love for the members of the Jamaat, that Hazur is sacrificing his every day, his every minute, his every moment for the sake of us, for the sake of our tarbiyat, for the sake of our reformation. And to the person, to the little tifl who's asked the question, the only way that Hazur fulfills it, as I said before, is because he's so sincere in his own prayers that he prays to Allah for help. He prays in the most beautiful way every single day. And then Allah helps him, and Allah has promised him, because he's the Khalifa, that he will help him. And it's truly, that's the only way. And the more you see Hazur's routine, it reminds you and makes you even more firm in your faith that Khilafat Ahmadiyya is a divine Khilafat.
Jazakallah Sahib. I think I'm going to get in trouble for asking the next question, but I think it's in the mind of everyone here, and it's about the next publication of your diary. And people want to know whether we can expect it anytime soon. Jazakallah.
I was, when you said you're going to get in trouble, I was expecting a more tougher question than that, actually. So I have some diaries to write, of course. I made notes for Hazur's Jalsa Salana UK, and Hazur's just travelled abroad to Germany and Belgium. I did take notes throughout the trip, and I will try my best to write them up as soon as I can. And that's, I guess, the best answer I can give for the time being. I'm not sure, but it depends how busy the next few weeks are. But I hope anyway in the next few weeks I'll start publishing them.
Jazakumullah Sahib. I think we could all sit here all night, listen to you about many different aspects of Hazur's lives and his work. I think we are incredibly privileged to have listened to Abid Sahib's talk and his answers to our questions. I've got a number of questions still to go, but in the interest of time and Abid Sahib's own time as well, I think we will try and push one last question, and it's regarding any example that stick out in your mind about remarkable incidents of acceptance of Hazur's prayers for individual Ahmadis. And I think with that, that would be the last question from our side. Jazakallah.
Jazakallah. The acceptance of Hazur's prayers, I'll give in every single tour, actually, even in the tour that just went past, there was a number of people who met Hazur in delegations who said, and they weren't Muslims or they weren't MDs for sure, But they'd been to previous jalsas, and they came up to Hazur this time, and they said that we asked your prayers for such and such thing, and those things seemed impossible to us, but we came back specially to this jalsa just to let you know that after you prayed, somehow those things happened just as we had hoped and desired. So this happens on many occasions. I remember, just to give one example, and we've been talking a bit about Australia today. In Australia, I met a khadim, and he came up to me himself actually and introduced himself. And he said that he and his wife had had mulaqat the evening before. And they were really excited to have that mulaqat because they had a child who was around 2 years old, or a year and a half or 2 years, I can't remember exactly, but around that. And they were going to take him to Hazur for the first time. But they also wanted to seek Hazur's prayers for something. Since the day the child was born, he had been unable to drink milk. As any parent will know, if your child isn't drinking milk, it's a cause for great, great concern. The child doesn't develop properly. Obviously, he won't grow properly. So these parents were completely and utterly desperate. They had been to many, many doctors who had given them advice. The wife herself was a doctor. She had done many, many types of research, tried many, many ways over the past 18 months or however long it was to try and get her child to drink milk. But every time they fed the child milk, he would instantly throw it up. And because of this, he wasn't growing properly. So the khadim told me, he said that we took some honey into the mulaqat and we told Hazur about our child's condition, that he's unable to digest milk. And we asked Hazur if he would be willing to take some honey and put it in our child's mouth and pray for him. And he said that Hazur very graciously accepted their request. They went home that evening, and the mother, she nervously took out some milk and she fed it to the child. And normally, after giving milk to the child, after 20 or 30 seconds, he would regurgitate it, it would all come out. So they waited. 30 seconds passed and nothing happened. Another 30 seconds passed. Then a minute passed. Then another minute passed. And the minutes continued to pass. And the parents, this khadim told me, he said, we sat there in complete astonishment. The child had been able to digest the milk perfectly well. A few hours had passed by. Then, in the middle of the night, the mother went and took another bottle to the child. And she fed him it. And once again, he was able to digest it without any problem. Literally, within hours, that issue that had been a cause of concern for 18 months or 2 years had vanished overnight. The khadim told us, he said that when we asked Hazur to pray, when we asked him to give the honey, we thought that, of course we had hope that it would lead, but we thought it would probably be something that would take many months, that slowly the child would improve through Hazur's prayers and through Hazur's guidance, and through Hazur's blessings. And so that their astonishment was something that I will never ever forget. And from time to time, I've kept in contact with that khadim. And with the grace of Allah, the child has grown completely normally and has never had any issues ever again. So that was just one example, but I could give many others and perhaps on some other occasion. Jazakallah. And if that was the last question, thank you everyone for listening. The thing is that I know it's very late and people are tired, and so Jazakallah, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you all. It's been my pleasure. Jazakallah.
I think we would all agree that it was our pleasure to listen to Abid Sahib. Once again, on behalf of Majlis and from all of us, I say Jazakumullah, Abid Sahib. And for those who are here, if you are, I'm sure we would like to go on, but if you would like to know more about Huzur's trips and Huzur's love for Jamaat and his acceptance of prayers, then I suggest you go to pressahmadiyya.com, all one word, pressahmadiyya.com/personal accounts, and you would see Abid Sahib's past and present diaries saved in PDF format there. So Jazakallah once again for all of you, and Jazakallah Abid Sahib.
Just one point on that. Hazrat Sahib thinks we don't publicize pressahmadiyya.com enough. So see he's taken the opportunity today. Jazakallah. Assalamu alaikum.